Hello and welcome back. I'm Arumba. Thank you for joining me. Let's do some more Arumba's Assay. Again, episode 2 of the Congo Assay. Alright, so let's turn off that alert for now so I don't see it again and get distracted. Next up, let's talk about artillery. I did this on a stream the other day and I just wanted to do it in one of these assays because I think that it's useful information for players who don't understand all of the way that math works with combat. So, let's just briefly talk about how casualties are calculated in EU4. Assuming all modifiers are equal, then the base casualties per day when you are in combat for a full strength regiment is 15. They'll kill 15 other people. 1,000 troops will kill 15. That number is modified by the dice rolls and the pips on your units. So if you roll a 5, then you get 5 times an extra 5 casualties per day on top of the base 15. So a 5 plus 15 equals 40 casualties. The dice roll can range from 0 to 9, which means there's an average of 4.5. Now, you can't actually roll a 4.5 so for the purposes of the math, I'm just going to use an average of 5. If on average you had 5 in every phase, which you can actually test by using a command in the console called combat dice 5, then you would inflict an average of 40 casualties per day. Then that number gets modified by your combat ability, your discipline, relative to their tactics. Then it's multiplied by your infantry fire or your infantry shock or whatever the unit type is multiplier. So if you have an infantry fire value of 0.8, that means that the 40 casualties will get reduced by 20% down to 32. Okay, with me so far, hopefully? So talking specifically about artillery, if we wanted to calculate the average death that a single artillery will inflict, the math would look something like this. We would go 15 base casualties plus 25 from the average dice roll of 5. Then, unfortunately, because artillery are in the back row, and when they're in the back row they do half damage, you would have to cut that number in 2. Then you multiply by your artillery fire multiplier, 1.4. So they're going to do 28 casualties per day. But they're only in that phase half the time. The other half of the time, they're in the shock phase. They're going to do 40 base casualties times 0.15. Then they're going to get that cut in half because they are in the back row. So on the shock phase, they only do 3 casualties. Together, 28 plus 3 means that they do an average of 15.5 casualties per day that they're in combat. Unfortunately, they cost 3 times as much as an infantry. So effectively, if you're just looking at the financial benefit of running one artillery, it's only effectively doing 5 casualties per day of death. That's good when you also consider the fact that the artillery is not taking any damage in combat because it's in the back row, so it's consistently pounding out 5 deaths per day. But if you compare it to an infantry does that 40 base times 0.8, meaning 32 casualties in the fire phase. They do 40 base times 1.15, 46 in the shock phase, plus the 32 divided by 2, an average of 39 deaths per day. They don't have any malice to being in the back row because they're in the front row. They do full damage from the front row, which means that they are doing 39 divided by 5.16 death per day. They do 7.5 times as much death per day per gold versus one artillery. Granted, this number goes down as they take damage because the base casualties is based on the assumption that they are at 1,000 regiment strength. So it does skew in favor of the artillery the weaker the infantry get. But my point in showing this is just that even though this 1.4 fire value seems good and it's much higher than the other modifiers here and here, you have to remember that artillery only do half damage from the back row. So this is effectively a 0.7 multiplier. Just cut this number in half. It's not going to be until we get to Tech 16, we gain another +1. It's not till like Tech 22 that artillery start to really do the majority of death. So my point in mentioning all of this is that if we are having economic concerns, I would probably recommend not running as many artillery. You have to consider them to be a luxury. If your economy is not where you want it to be, start dropping artillery. At this stage of the game, for this player, I would probably recommend just going with value artillery until you feel like your economy is in a very strong place. Same thing can basically be said about cavalry. They're not quite as expensive as artillery, but they do a lot more effective damage. So honestly, I would probably just go with 1 or 2 artillery right now and no cav in the current player situation. Once the economy is stronger and you're making 30 to 40% of your gross income in net income, meaning if we're making 52.4 ducats a month, we want to be getting 52.4 times 0.3, about 16 ducats in surplus income, minimum, then you might consider running more advanced luxury type things like artillery and cavalry. But until then, we should stay cheap mode, just like we do cheap mode with the advisors. Okay, there's one other thought. It gets worse. That math was a quick rundown. I skipped a lot of modifiers and steps and things and just, told you to assume they're all equal. But you have to consider that artillery have fewer total pips than infantry as well. The actual pips on the units affects the amount of death that they inflict. These guys only have 6 pips on total versus infantry that have 10, cavalry which have also, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 as well. So 10 pips, 10 pips, 6 pips. So it gets worse, right? So consider trimming down the army a little bit if the economy is looking weak. I noticed that he has a template. He's using a 12-2-4 template. Again, just taking everything I just said now into consideration, I would consider running like a 12-1-1 or a 12-0-1 or possibly even just a 10-0-1 template until you have your economy in a better spot. All right, state edicts. Looks like we just got an institution recently. Looks like he may have just forgotten to turn these edicts off. So I'm going to turn those off for him. Capital state. Based on the fact that we do have a center of trade, I would recommend that we do run a trade power edict here. Since we're going to be running that edict, again, it makes a lot of sense to consider that courthouse in this province. That still should make us more money overall than the cost of having it on. Okay, looking at estates. Pretty good usage of the estates. We are not currently using the ask for contribution click, which I think we should be doing on command. I like to pair that with the Grant Admiralship click because they both have a 10-year cooldown, and you don't get a pop-up when ask for contribution expires. So if you always do Grant Admiralship and ask for contribution at the same time, you will get a pop-up saying Grant Admiralship influence modifier has expired, which then allows you to know that it's time to get another contribution from the burghers. So what I would like to do is I'm going to try to find a couple provinces we can grant the burghers right now in order to get their influence up to 75%. Actually, no, we don't even need to. If we're going to grant admiralship, they'll be above 75. We want to get their influence above 75 because there are breakpoints to the strength of this click. Right now it's 321.38 ducats. If we just grant admiralship, it's going to go up. See how it's at 482 now? 482 divided by 321, it's now 50% stronger just because we're above that influence threshold. So we're going to take that money, of course. We don't want to recruit a conquistador. We don't need manpower. I personally, these days, really like taking that click and then giving some of it back to the clergy. By doing that, we can keep our clergy really happy for a long time, which makes it easier to use them for conversions. And also, when the clergy are loyal, meaning they're above 60%, the events that you get from the estates change. It's the same with every estate. Any estate that's loyal will give you a different set of events when they're happy. The clergy in particular give a lot of stability boosting events, which is really nice when you're a republic, and I just think it's worth the money. So we're gonna keep them above 60% in loyalty for a long time. Let's go ahead and take some of that money and build the workshop in that first province. Let's also queue up some more light ships. As I mentioned, that is one of the most valuable and quickest, bestest thing we could possibly build. We're going to overbuild the ship force limit. We have way too many transports, I think. I would be running about 33 light ships. Naval force limit equal to light ships is generally what I try to run. Don't go over that. And then just a few value transports to get armies around. In fact, I think 5 is probably plenty. I can't imagine that we're actually invading anyone that we need these transports for, unless you were considering using them to like attack Spain or something, but I don't really know about that. All right. Moving on to the next thing in my list, we've got government reforms. This player, when becoming a republic, chose oligarchy. In my opinion, oligarchy is one of the weaker republic types. It does have a short election cycle of 4 years. I'm just not really a huge fan of it. There's better versions of this, like the Ambrosian Republic, which the Milan government can get. Plutocracy, I think, is usually stronger just because you get the goods produced modifier and you still have the short trade term duration. It does limit you to 20 provinces in states, but I probably would have preferred plutocracy, personally. It's not a bad option, but it's just, I think, one of the weakest types of republic. Second tier, he took, could re-elect from ruling family. This is my favorite tier 2 reform for republics because it allows you to choose a 30-year-old ruler guaranteed when you need him. So if you're at real high republican tradition and you want to start re-electing the same guy over and over and over again, if you don't take political dynasties, then you are just hoping that the guy that you re-elect or that you elect will be young. But there's no guarantee he'll be young. He could be 60, he could be 50. With the nephew, he is always going to be 30 years old. Then, on top of that, there is also the bonus of +1 guaranteed pip. He will have a bonus of +1 to either admin, dip, or mill. It's just nice to have. It only applies the first time you hire him, but hey, it's an extra guaranteed monarch point, taking your starting monarch points per month from 6 to 7 when you get a new person. The nephew is random stats, though, so sometimes he'll be really bad. I just like to take a look at him every time that election cycle comes up. Tier 3, this is a big mistake in my opinion. This player chose consolidation of power, increasing the length of election term to 5 years instead of 4, and raising max absolutism by 10. I don't want to spend the rest of this episode shitting on absolutism, but 10 absolutism, well, technically it's 20 absolutism if you were to go this way, because you have to lose 10 max in order to take frequent elections. 20 absolutism is just not good enough. And it's such a compelling difference that I made a spreadsheet. So let's go look at the spreadsheet. I wanted to try to articulate this, and I didn't think I'd be able to do it just by shitting on absolutism. So here's a spreadsheet on monarch point average generation from re-election as a republic. I will make a link in the video down in the description down below to this spreadsheet if you want to play with it yourself. Basically, let me just walk you through it. Years since elected, 0. So if you have an election term of 4 years, the base ruler stats are 6. We're going to set it to 7 if we have the bonus for the random election, right? From having the nephew tier 2 monarch bonus. Random monarch point bonus, whenever you re-elect in vanilla EU4, you gain 50 random monarch points. You can't decide where they're going to be, but you always get at least one of them. And then the amount of re-elect increased monarch points is 3 because you gain +1 on your ruler. This spreadsheet's very simple. It does not take into consideration situations where you have like a 6-1-1 or something, and when you re-elect, you only gain 2 increased monarch points. It's not that complicated, but it's enough to showcase just how impactful that election term change is bad. So if we look at it, monthly monarch point generation, total monarch points generated by the ruler, the random monarch points that you gain on the re-election. Notice how we get 50 on the 4th year, another 50 on the 8th year, another 50 on the 12th year, etc. Total monarch point is the sum of these two columns. Monarch points from the random generation event as a percentage of the total generated. The first re-elect is when it's the largest, and then the longer the ruler gets re-elected, the higher his average stats go. I did put a if-then type restriction on here so that it can't go above 24 monarch points from the... oh, and actually, nope, I made a mistake. That should actually not be 24, it should be 18. Let me update the formula real quick. That's not the right page. This formula should actually be max 18. You can't go up to 24. Wouldn't that be silly? 18 is the highest that the ruler can get. Fixed. Right, so average monarch points per month then. 7 if you have the candidate bonus. After the first re-election, your average is 11. Yeah, 11.04 because you also get the re-elect, the 50 monarch points from the re-election bonus. So let's just take a look what happens to the spreadsheet if we switch over to the 5-year election term. Let's say that you keep your ruler for an average of like, say, I don't know, 10, 12 years, somewhere around here. You're generating right now an average of 13.83 monarch points per month from the leader. And if you go to 5 years, at that 10-year mark, you are going to still be at 13.83. But in the short term, you are really harming the early monarch point generation. You have 10.83 on year 5. What is going on? Why are you not updating? It is updating. I'm just bad at... I didn't plan this part very well. Basically, what I'm trying to show is that if you have a 3-year election term, then you can be generating, within the first 10 years, 17 monarch points a month versus 14 monarch points a month. on average throughout the total of that whole period of time. It's a huge, huge difference in overall monarch point generation. Just take a look at the spreadsheet on your own time and see if you can figure it out, or discuss it in the comments down below. But I do not like the idea of having a 5-year election cycle, and I would definitely recommend going over to the other one. Unfortunately, right now, we are not really in a great financial position, and I don't think we should switch. But, yeah, 10 corruption to switch right now would be pretty bad. But again, you're concerned about tech. You're concerned about falling behind on ideas and technology, and you don't feel like you're very strong. And, you know, I'm going to say we should just do it. Let's just take the damn corruption penalty, whatever. That means we're going to get a re-election right away. All right. I want to try to wrap up my list before the end of this episode so we can move on to the next thing. I just want to mention one last thing. Re-election costs are 2.5 Republican tradition per year of election cycle, no matter what. So it does not affect the re-elect cost. When you go from 5 years down to... Where are we looking? Right here. Right here. It says 8, but that's because paradox math is stupid and it's rounding up to 8. It's 7.5, 10, and 12.5 is the actual cost. So you're still paying 2.5 Republican tradition per year every time you choose to re-elect. All right, talking about religions, we are still fetishist, and it's very bad compared to virtually any alternative possible. This religion gives discipline plus 2.5. I don't want this. I think we should switch to anything else. I would recommend Sunni. Catholic is also acceptable if you want to try to play friendly with people in Europe. But the advantage of the Sunni switch would be that we would have access to the dhimmi estate, which means we could just assign a lot of this fetishist land to the dhimmi. The dhimmi give increased taxes. They give increased tolerance of heathens. The fetishists would be considered heathens, and we could basically convert only some of the country, while at the same time getting huge increases to tax income, discounts to technology, access to the piety system, which is more tech cost discount, more manpower, more money. There's just so many advantages to going Sunni. I would recommend it as soon as possible, as soon as we can stockpile enough admin points to make that happen. Relationship-wise, we have one alliance. We're allied right now to Morocco. I don't know why. We've been allied to them for a while. I don't know why we're allied to them. I feel like this is a big risk. It's basically just going to pull us into wars with Spain and Portugal, probably. And on top of that, we're over the relationship limit. So I would recommend we get rid of that. Vassals is the very last thing on my list. So we have 4 vassals. Mahafali, who is down here. We've got Mombasa, who is here. We've got Buganda, who is here. And we've got Ajaran, who is up here. Now, there's a few things that I like to consider when making a vassal, and I just want to run you through my list of what you should think about or what I think about. What is the purpose of your subject? Why are you wanting him? For me, there are a few different things that usually come to mind. Either I want their army, because I want them to have an extra manpower pool, which means another 10,000 base manpower, 100 manpower per month, 6 base force limit, -3 for being a subject. They can basically field 3 or 4 troops for free, is the way I see them. So sometimes I want a vassal because I want them to provide me with a slight little boost to my army. In our current circumstance, we've got full quantity ideas. We've got tons of sorry, we don't have full quantity ideas, but we have quantity ideas, tons of manpower. We're doing the heavy lifting, so that's not really what these subjects are doing. So if we're not asking them for an army, then the next thing that you would use for an army, for vassals, is to increase your own personal force limit. Every vassal increases your force limit by a fair bit. In the very early game, sometimes that's better than having 1 extra province. That's not why we're doing it. We've got plenty of force limit. If not that, then income, because vassals will pay you. We currently have very low vassal income taxation, but we can also transfer their trade. Now, right now, you are missing out, sir, on 5.93 ducats a month in total income that your subjects are currently making from trade. All of them are in nodes that are upstream or potentially upstream from where we should end up moving our trade node to. So that's like 6 ducats a month we could be capitalizing on. And since we don't care about their economy because we don't need their army, this is money that we need to take from them. This treasury is useless. When you inherit or integrate these subjects, that money just disappears. Letting them build up a positive treasury is just bad. Like they're not going to spend it well. They're not going to build the right buildings. They're going to do everything wrong, and you shouldn't trust them, essentially. So yeah. Okay, other things that I consider is compartmentalizing problems. If there is high unrest, if I don't want to deal with war exhaustion, if I want my subject to get sieged instead of me so I can protect my prosperity, those things these subjects are currently doing because they're on the front lines while protecting our homeland, which is good. And then the other consideration, which you did mention in your post, is spreading out the cost of integration. Spending Diplo points to integrate some land and admin points to core other land is a great way to spread out the monarch point cost. So, lastly then, looking at Ajuran, I saw that you started the integration. This to me is very strange. We're behind on tech. We have not finished our idea groups. I would say that the order of priorities for monarch point expenses are core your overextended provinces, then do ideas, then do tech, then consider integration. I would not integrate somebody if I'm behind time on tech, ever. I would just let them sit. On top of that, we have no state slots. We're at 21 out of 21 states. So if we integrate Ajuran right now, that means this land is going to be uncored. It's going to be territorial cores, 75% autonomy. It's not going to give us very much economy relative to what he's getting out of it. And if we just keep him as a subject, we can just transfer his trade and we get pretty much all the benefit from this land without having to make it into states. So I would recommend you don't integrate this guy right now. And I am going to turn on divert trade. Even though technically these guys are downstream, like, sorry, they're in a node that we can't actually get the money from. Their trade is going to go from Zanzibar into the Ivory, Cape of Good Hope into the Ivory Coast. We're going to privateer their trade value for now and eventually move our capital trade node to there. So, woof, I was right. It took 2 episodes to get through the whole list. That all being said, I'm going to take a break here, and in the next episode we're going to play, and we're going to try to get our economy up to the point where we are kicking some ass. So, thank you for watching. Hope you guys are enjoying the campaign so far. I'll see you in the next episode. See you soon.